History channel and to our live stream Q&A. Ask Me Anything, excuse me, our President's Day special, where we will be answering any questions you have about history or social studies for the next hour or so. In fact, we may even go 2 hours. I'm in a very good mood. I got some tea brewing on the stove that I just turned off. It's a rainy day here. I'm in my smoking jacket, turning me into History Hefner. So on this President's Day, I will be fielding all sorts of questions about U.S. history, U.S. presidents, all sorts of things, as well as, of course, history of all different types and backgrounds. This is not only very important because it's a 3-day weekend, it's a very popular American holiday, it's an American holiday related to history, but it is also, of course, it is an important holiday for the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel because it is our 2-year birthday. It is the birthday of the channel. We were started on the Sunday of President's Day, and from there, I'll have different presidential backgrounds from time to time. But we came about on President's Day, or the Sunday before President's Day, the day before President's Day, back in 2024. So we are in our, third year. We just started officially our 3rd year of broadcasting. Thanks to all of your support and love and watching all of our videos and absorbing all of our content. We are going strong, and our goal is to get to 20,000 subscribers this year. So we're really looking forward to that, and we hope that you can help us by liking and subscribing and enjoying all the history content, both short and long form. Please check out my video coming out later today about Black History Month. I hope you really, really enjoy it. But yeah, we will be going for at least an hour. We're going a few hours earlier. I had originally intended to go at 6 p.m. Eastern, but I figured everything being as it is, with a rainstorm and a hot pot of tea and everything else, it made perfect sense to actually start off a live stream earlier, and that allows people from other parts of the world who tune into the channel from all over the world, who want to talk about history of their societies and their cultures. It allows them a little bit more leeway to join us, and it's not super late at night over there. They don't have to pull all-nighters in order to enjoy the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. But yes, a happy President's Day, a happy birthday to this channel, and we welcome you, and we're glad that you are here. It was on the Sunday before President's Day back in 2024 when I made my first video, and you guys can go and watch those first 2 videos. I made them at the same time. I didn't know that you could do 60-second shorts versus 15-second shorts. I just knew that I was going to make a video about a couple of topics. One was the fall of Rome, and one was the Civil War. I'll tell the full story later on, maybe near the end of the live stream. But yeah, that's how the Friendly Neighborhood History channel came to be. There's a longer story that's more interesting, I think, that you will all enjoy, hopefully later on. But in the meantime, please drop any questions or comments or topics about history or social studies that you would like in the chat. I'm in the Friendly Neighborhood History studio, ready to answer all of your questions. And I've got some presidential backgrounds, such as a McKinley Roosevelt campaign poster from 1900 at the turn of the century. Theodore Roosevelt was selected by William McKinley because a lot of Republicans were worried that Roosevelt would run for president on his own. When McKinley was shot and killed, Roosevelt became president and became a pretty darn good one at that. Definitely one of the most well-known American presidents, so there's that too. I had a background of showing Ulysses S. Grant in his presidential campaign in 1868, reminiscent of Abraham Lincoln, and reminding people not only of Grant's military service, but his loyalty to the United States and his closeness to Abraham Lincoln. You can see the broken shackles for slaves and things like that that promoted Grant in 1868. There's a nice presidential poster and background. Of course, we've got the very notorious Woodrow Wilson, the 26th president, or 28th president of the United States, who created the Federal Reserve and therefore is hated by libertarians, is the president of the income tax, and is also the president during the Great War, who helped create and rebuild European civilization and society after that, and is quite controversial for many of his racist and retrogressive ideas and progressive ideals that turned out to be pretty dated, such as when he was the governor of New Jersey ordering sterilizations. So he's one of the most controversial figures in U.S. history and on this channel. While many historians of the past really love Woodrow Wilson's pro-democratic self-determination ideas, the creation of the League of Nations, kind of the invention of a supranational post-World War II consensus order that he was advocating 30 years before that. A lot of people have shed light on Wilson's more racist and egregious behaviors, his inability to be honest with the public about his health and other things like that. And of course, I have this extraordinarily famous painting that many people, or picture that many people think is a fake, but it's of Mary Todd Lincoln, and this is taken a few years after Abraham's death. And you can see in the background there seems to be some sort of outline of her husband, Abraham Lincoln. So happy President's Day to you. Lincoln is one of the most notorious presidential ghosts, by the way. And of course, we also have this very funny one. This is the Jefferson, Washington, and Madison 3.14, the third, first, and fourth presidents, respectively. Might be a little hard to see. But yeah, I've got different backgrounds suited for President's Day, and I'm willing to talk about presidential and U.S. history, but any type of history. Here's Warren Harding with his wife, Florence, who most likely poisoned him because she was tired of his philandering and his many scandals, which ruined the presidency of America's 29th U.S. president. Here's James Madison, who, one of the major writers of the Constitution, helped create the presidential system and then served as the nation's fourth president, the first to lead it into an official war, the War of 1812, for which he is, which kind of damaged his legacy. But there's a lot of different U.S. presidents that I'll be showing and showcasing today as I answer your questions about history and social sciences. So please drop a topic, comment, or question in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer it. Here's William McKinley again, one of the most underrated presidents, the inspiration, by the way, for The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Wilson was the worst president, IMO, League of Nations weak. Well, if the United States had joined the League of Nations, it actually probably would have been far more successful. So Wilson didn't get what he wanted. Who knows how the League of Nations would have operated with the United States, Great Britain, and France kind of pulling the leash on Germany in the 1920s and 30s. Oh yeah, Andrew Jackson's genocide, the Trail of Tears, well documented. Talked about it a lot last week during our live stream lecture. Of course, here's Abraham Lincoln. And here's a background of George Washington. George Washington is the only U.S. president to have a state named after him, the state of Washington. So yes, questions about history or social studies. And you know what? I'm just going to pick this background that has all of the U.S. presidents. You can't see all of them in the picture, but all of the U.S. presidents from Washington back down to Donald Trump. So please like and subscribe, and please drop a question about history or social studies in the chat. And if you want to give a super chat or become a member, anything helps this channel, including watching all the short and long form content that we've got available for you. And yeah, Teddy Roosevelt is pretty manly. So manly, he didn't like being called Teddy. He preferred to be called Theodore Roosevelt. But welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, and we're glad that you're sharing your President's Day, your extra day off perhaps, with us. They claim Ulysses S. Grant was the worst. I had to do a report on him once in 5th grade, and all I remember is he turned the White House into a brothel for 4 years. Well, he didn't necessarily do that. He had a lot of... Ulysses S. Grant seems to have been an honest man by all accounts. He's the only U.S. president who was a witness at a trial. He was willing to be honest, even let the value of gold depreciate steadily so that he could thwart a conspiracy by members of his own administration. What Grant struggled with was being a judge of character. He was so terrible at actually picking the right people. They replaced his own vice president for him. He kept appointing people who had been his political allies and friends. At this point, Tammany Hall and the corrupt political machines of Boss Tweed and Roscoe Conkling are huge in major cities. And so in order to get into political positions, you have to be able to make promises and reward those who help you to get into those positions, which is something that Grant and many other presidents did. And there was definitely a need for reform. Grant's administration wasn't the first to play the spoils system of rewarding your friends and punishing your enemies, but regardless of their qualifications, as the bureaucracy and the executive branch in particular was not exactly a meritocracy at the time, but Grant's was probably the worst in U.S. history up to that point. Who was better, Jackson or Taft? Jackson is certainly the far more influential and impactful president, and a happy President's Day to you, Shuriken. Great to see you and all the other friendly neighborhood historians like Alvavu, who was with us just over 2 years ago when we started this entire project. So really appreciate seeing you, and I hope you and the family are well. And I'm glad you're celebrating us at work. Taft didn't really get much done. He was kind of stymied by Theodore Roosevelt, and his presidency is kind of one of those third-term presidencies that often gets lampooned for not being very successful. Taft would have been interesting had he had his own chance, but he never wanted to be president. He wanted to be the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And you can learn more about that by watching my series on the U.S. Supreme Court here on YouTube. Watergate aside, was Nixon an excellent president? Take away Watergate, I wouldn't say Nixon was excellent, but he was definitely capable. He was definitely a thoughtful politician, a good administrator, and knew his stuff. The napalming bombing raids, the Vietnamization projects in Laos and Cambodia turned out to be failures, and of course caused untold amounts of suffering for the people of those regions. The price controls Nixon put in caused the stagflation that the 70s is notorious for. So Nixon's presidency wasn't without error aside from Watergate, but generally it was a very successful administration. Nixon won in 1972 in one of the largest landslides in U.S. history, maybe the largest ever. What did you think of the new release information if Nixon being targeted by, you think, was Army released recently? I don't know if Nixon was targeted. There's a lot of people who seem to say that, and there is a concerted effort by a lot of people, particularly on the right, to kind of rehabilitate Nixon's legacy. There are a lot of parallels between Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. I go into a lot of detail in both my videos on both presidents, but also in my live stream lecture on Richard Nixon. I have 2 videos about Richard Nixon, 2 live stream lectures. He's such a extensive topic, and we do those lectures every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, by the way, in case you're interested. But Nixon's legacy is definitely tried to be rehabilitated by people on the right, particularly fans of the new president, or the old new president, or new old president, whatever you want to call him. Because Nixon is known for his corruption, which is something that Trump has been accused of many times. Both presidents believed an election was stolen from them, and both of them were seen as kind of corrupt figures throughout their political career leading into the White House and even after they got into the White House. What can you say about U.S. military-built brothels in Vietnam near a military base? I wouldn't be surprised if they did that. Was Calvin Coolidge misunderstood? I wouldn't say misunderstood so much as underrated. America was extraordinarily prosperous and successful during the Coolidge administration. Coolidge was the one who restabilized Europe with the Dawes Plan, put Germany on the road to recovery. The economy boomed during his presidency. Everything that you love about the Roaring Twenties was basically the product of Harding and then, to a greater extent, Coolidge's economic policies. Yeah, I'm not surprised that the Viet Cong visited those brothels. Trump, the best president in history. Trump feed his military. Great, we love Trump. Oh, for goodness sakes. Yes, we get people like that, and then we get people who just want to talk about President Trump on President's Day, or any U.S. president for that matter. But a happy President's Day to you. Welcome. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the history I'm talking about, and drop a topic, comment, or question about any history you would like me to discuss. And if you hear a lot of ASMR background, it is the rainstorm that I'm currently enduring, but I really love it. I enjoy the rain. It just put me in the mood to talk about history with all of you. I'm taking a sip of my coffee. I've got tea that I made, freshly brewed tea on the stove. John Quincy Adams. I mean, probably would have another guy who would have been a great president had he not had to deal with a more powerful, outspoken public figure tarnishing him. Taft struggled with that with Theodore Roosevelt, who had once been his friend, and Adams struggled that with Andrew Jackson, who consistently demanded that and insisted that the election of 1824 had been stolen and been taken away from him. ASMR historical facts to fall asleep to. I love that. I'll have to do that. There are videos like that where they use AI and just lay out historical facts. What I'd love to do at some point, and I just got to have the discipline to sit down and stream it properly on my laptop, is play video games, maybe some old RTS or RPG games, and just talk about historical facts off the top of my head. A lot of people think Reagan was the best president. I don't agree, but I don't hate Reagan like a lot of people want to do. Do you have a metal roof? Yes, I do. Roosevelt watched the funeral procession of Lincoln in New York City. Yes, Roosevelt was from a wealthy Dutch Reformed American family. Yeah, JR, it's sad what happened to John Quincy Adams. At another time, the American system would have been a triumphant success, and Adams would have been a very, very successful president. Do you admire Grant? As a general, yes. As a president, less so. You could try to do more of a structured lecture type stream. We do that, Roman, every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. We did one yesterday on the February holidays. Go check it out. But we do Q&As, usually every Friday and Saturday, but we're doing a bonus today because it's President's Day. A lot of people want to... It's funny because Reagan was actually loved during his presidency and considered extremely successful. It's only recent revisions that have seemingly put Reagan in the doghouse. I'm doing well. I hope you do well, too. The shortest president in office, how do you think he would have done if he wasn't killed? Wasn't the shortest president James Madison? What is going on with the 1812 debate? So a couple of my moderators want to debate the topic, one a Brit, one an American, want to debate the topic of the War of 1812, a topic that's very controversial here on the channel that I've made my opinion known about many, many times. But the truth of the matter is I've covered the War of 1812. I've done a live stream lecture on James Madison's presidency and a live stream lecture on the War of 1812 itself. The war doesn't really interest me that much anymore because it's been talked about to death. But basically, people want to reinterpret it according to their own lenses. So a couple of my moderators have agreed to do a debate. We were supposed to do it over Discord and then produce the recording here on YouTube. Or we're going to live stream it here on YouTube if we can figure out a way to go live together. Clinton, great president or huge failure? Clinton's presidency seems to be pretty stable. You've got a lot of people who want 90s nostalgia, who miss the 90s, who love what the 90s brought to the United States and to the world. So there's a lot of 90s nostalgia for Gen X and millennials that kind of reminds me of the in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of nostalgia for the 1950s. That's why Back to the Future was such a successful film. But the 90s were, generally speaking, a pretty successful and peaceful time compared to eras before and since then. So Clinton's presidency, it's hard to judge fully, even though it was 30 years ago, was generally very successful. His personal scandals, some policy failures, obviously the issues in Bosnia and Kosovo and other parts of the world, the emboldening of Osama bin Laden and the rise of international Islamic terrorism. Probably Clinton was asleep at the wheel on some of those issues. But his presidency, especially domestically, was generally pretty successful. Well, Clinton hated white Christians and the militia. Well, that's the reputation because of what's happened with David Koresh and the Branch Davidians at Waco. Obviously, another one of Clinton's blunders when he was in the office. Can you do a Noah's Ark history lecture? Well, might as well at this point. I mean, how much history do we really have to sustain that Noah's Ark actually happened? I mean, we did discover the mountain that the Ark supposedly rested on, but there was no Ark there, Mount Ararat in Turkey. Obviously, what I find fascinating about Noah's Ark from a historical perspective, I don't particularly talk about any religious or political perspectives of my own here. Those topics come up only in the context of history, and I discuss them in the context of history as the rain finally dies down back to ASMR instead of raging storm, Jesus walking on water levels. But Noah's Ark is interesting because almost every major ancient civilization had a narrative of the gods destroying the world with a flood. You have the Epic of Gilgamesh. Zeus supposedly destroyed the world with a flood when he saw human beings cannibalizing each other, and the God of the Bible supposedly does it too. So legends of ancient floods seem to be explanations of deluges and things like that. Groundwater springs. Obviously, there's a reference to that in the Noah's Ark story where water shoots up from the ground to meet the water that's falling from the air. They didn't understand the water cycle. They didn't understand wells or ground wells or any of that stuff. So it was an explanation. It's an ideological explanation of why does it rain? Why does water fall from the ground? Why does it stop? Why doesn't it just consume us? They didn't understand about evaporation and precipitation. They didn't understand which kind of clouds brought rain. So their best explanation was, well, this is why. And why is there an iridescent shape of an arc in the sky after rain? Well, they didn't understand necessarily water and light and its interactions. So instead, they said, well, this is God's promise not to destroy the world again. Now, I'm not saying that Noah's Ark couldn't have happened or didn't happen. I'm saying the antediluvian world is so ancient that there's really no way to prove that it did happen. So to argue that it did or didn't happen is somewhat of an argument from silence. But it is definitely part of the mythology of the ancient Hebrew people and the mythology of the Judeo-Christian world, but also it kind of corresponds to the mythologies of many other ancient societies like the Greeks, the Chinese, and the Romans, and also, of course, the Mesopotamians. So there are oceans under the oceans. I don't know if that's true or not. If you enjoyed what I just talked about, please like and subscribe. Let me see. Do you like dragons, though? Dragons are also kind of that ancient mythological explanation. I mean, who doesn't like dragons? In Christianity, particularly in medieval lore, where you have dragons guarding gold, they're a symbolism of the devil, of lust, and of greed, and of power. And you can see that all the way down to Smaug in Tolkien's Hobbit. These are ancient Christian symbols. The devil is referred to as a serpent, a dragon, in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. The Chinese obviously put the dragon on a much greater level of reverence and respect and veneration rather than being the enemy. It is a symbol of power and strength in ancient and medieval Chinese societies. Why historically socialism and nationalism had conflicts? Well, communism was a effort to force a worldwide revolution and overthrow of the nationalist structure in Marxist-Leninist ideology. Basically, nationalism would keep people from true socialism and communism. Communism was supposed to be a worldwide revolution. It wasn't ever supposed to be in one or two nations, and it was supposed to spread all over the world because it's not workers of Germany, it's not workers of Italy, it's not workers of Ethiopia, it's not workers of Brazil, it's workers of the world unite. So because of that, nationalism cannot exist. Nationalism is a product of democracy, capitalism, patriotism, and the old royal structure. So in pure Marxist terminology and perspective, nationalism is what the upper class uses to force the lower class to do what they want. It is a way, patriotism, nationalism, these things have no place in a communist post-monetary society that Marx and Lenin were trying to create. However, more practical forms of communism realized that there had to be some sort of affinity and connection to the to the country that the communist revolution had started in. Stalin appeals to the motherland in order to not save the revolution but save Russia in his efforts to stop Barbarossa and the German invasion of the 40s. Of course, socialism and nationalism do kind of get blended together with the Nazis and the fascists in Italy, who see socialism as a good idea, but don't like the more authoritarian command, mixed economy, whatever you want to call it, planned economy of communism, but don't really feel that it's worldwide, that it should only work in particular instances, and the only way to actually get the power that you want is by appealing to national sympathies, cultural traditions, and a shared system of values that defines your nationhood. And it actually worked in the sense that many societies were willing to incorporate some authoritarian, socialist, and planned economy elements, while touting the importance of their cultural motifs, ideas, and themes as being superior to that of other people. This worked in Italy, it worked in Germany, it worked in Spain. Now, when I say worked, I don't mean that it was good. What I mean was it was effective in giving them power. One of the reasons Franco remains in power in Spain is because he is constantly able to appeal to the church and the military as traditional bulwarks of what makes the Spanish. And so the church never turned on Franco, which allowed him to remain in power long after the church had abandoned figures like Mussolini and Hitler. Although Mussolini and Hitler weren't beyond trying to co-opt the church to do whatever they wanted. Look at the German Christian church basically reinterpreting the New Testament in light of Arian white supremacy, and look at the Lateran Treaty, in which Mussolini created created Vatican City in order to get a stamp of approval from the Pope. The church on its own was more than willing to allow some of these elements because they believed that these cultural nationalist groups would support Christian tradition. They were wrong. Anyways, sorry, I went into a lot of detail there about it. So socialism and nationalism can work together on certain occasions. I went into a lot more detail because it's such an interesting topic. There's some white noise in the back, or is it just me? It's rain. And who doesn't like dragons? I'm going to try to catch up to the chat. I don't say where I am in the United States. So you'll have to keep guessing. Let me see here. Let me see. It will be, yeah. You've been reported twice. Well, have fun with that. Aztecs also spoke of a great flood. Yep. And for them, it was a conflict between their various deities, like Quetzalcoatl. Scientists have discovered evidence of a massive water-rich reservoir located roughly 700 kilometers over 400 miles deep within Earth's mantle. Well, that could explain ground walls and water spewing up from the ground. Which civilization had the most understanding of cosmology? The Greeks? The Egyptians had a strong understanding. Obviously, the zodiac, the interpretations of different constellations by images of ancient Greek legends, myths, and mythologies, which of course is convoluted and co-opted by the Romans, who basically steal all the Greek heroes and make them their own with their new names. Heracles becomes Hercules, for instance. Understandings of astronomy were limited by our standards, but were pretty advanced by the standards of the ancient world. But zodiacs, interpretations of different collections of the stars, is one of those historical things that in ancient civilizations seems to be the case. The Persians had it, the Mayans had it, the Romans had it. Three very disconnected civilizations in different parts of the world, all somewhat contemporary to each other, all have this basic idea of these stars making shapes, and those shapes having power and meaning in people's lives. Noah's Ark was found on a mountain. It's not symbolic. Well, then where is it today, John? I'm not impressed with Eisenhower. Am I wrong? A lot of people aren't. President Eisenhower's presidency wasn't extremely impressive when it happened, but you see the creation of the international highway system, the buildup of the nuclear arsenal against the Soviets, which he used as a deterrent to prevent a land war. You have the creation of NASA. You have the beginning of the civil rights movement. You have the Montgomery bus boycott. You have the desegregation of the schools. You have Eisenhower enforcing that when he didn't have to. You have expansions of Social Security and other welfare programs. You also have a relatively robust economy, a stable America that is continually at the top of the world when it comes to standards of living, wealth creation, and productivity. Eisenhower's presidency is not a golden era, because there's plenty of problems that are happening, but it is a very very strong period in American history where if you are an American nationalist or you have a strong idea of American patriotism, it makes a lot of sense to really like it. Communists are the only ones united, not the United States. Debate me. I'm not debating anyone. We're moving towards a blend of socialism and capitalism at the end of the age of abundance. Well, that's what the mixed economies of Europe are like, to some extent. Abdullah Hashem is the messenger to the Antichrist Muhammad Ali Mahdi, who says Trump evil. So is Trump evil or the Antichrist messenger? Greenland, anyone? I don't know what you're talking about. Can we keep this on history and social studies, please, like it's supposed to be? Let me see. No one wants to be a part of communism. Well, I wouldn't say no one. There's definitely people who are still sympathetic to communism, believe they could get communism to work if it was tried under the right circumstances. The failure of Lenin to actually create a successful communist revolution in an industrialized society has had many people thinking ever since then that perhaps it just needs the right parameters for a communist revolution to actually properly work. Marx suggested that the best way to have a communist revolution is to have one in an industrialized society. No industrialized society in Europe in the late 19th century was actually interested in a communist revolution. Therefore, Lenin's experiment in Russia seems to have been prudent in the sense that it brought about communism, but failed in the attempt to actually make a fully industrialized, as Russia was only partly industrialized, nation a communist bulwark. And the revolution didn't spread the way he wanted it to. Hello, Wild and Fresh. Great to see you. Wild and Fresh is one of my moderators. I do not curate a museum, but thank you. I do know a bunch. Who's your favorite president? Probably Lincoln. Why is there an assumption that Noah's Ark is lost? I mean, I don't know. If we found it, then we should have remnants of it at least available to us. Thank you for joining us from Hamburg, Germany, and people from all over the world join us. It's really cool. Lenin's mausoleum probably looks cool. Well, Lenin never wanted that kind of press and attention. It was all Stalin's effort to unify the Communist Party and the people of the Soviet Union around his leadership and his ideas by basically making himself Lenin's best friend while excoriating and pushing away everyone else like Trotsky and Bukharin. Eisenhower saw America changing through the evolution of the military and the mission. True. FDR is an S-tier president. I don't know. I don't think so. I think FDR was a great president in many ways, especially with how he handled the last World War, what you call World War II, what I think is World War III. But I think that I don't think Roosevelt solved the Great Depression. I think creating Social Security, the FDIC, things like this, unemployment insurance, were in the long term good benefits for the U.S. When it comes to taking care of the less able in the society, making sure banks don't collapse and the like. But actually, generally speaking, the economy did not get fixed until the war. Roosevelt's programs were ruled unconstitutional over and over again. They did not affect the change that they were supposed to affect. And the New Deal did not actually end the Great Depression. Some think it prolonged the Great Depression. I don't know if that's true or not. But Roosevelt's ingenuity and leadership during the war is obviously top-notch. So he's not an S-tier president for me. I don't even know that he's an A-tier president. You also have the fact that FDR interred the Japanese. And people don't talk about that enough, but they really should. It was FDR who did that and didn't care about it. He also refused to pass anti-lynching legislation. He built a coalition which included many Southern Democrats, and the way to keep Southern Democrats happy, despite the huge shift of African-American voters towards Roosevelt and the Democratic Party in the 30s, is by basically promoting segregation, or at least allowing it to continue. Washington and Jefferson are good choices. No question about that. Theodore Roosevelt is the type of president we need. The technocrats are getting control. Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt was, I think, better than his cousin. Roosevelt was definitely progressive. He got things fixed. It would have been interesting to see him deal with a world war or a depression, but America became an international threat. And you could say that America's success in both world wars is because of the framework of international intervention and America being a superpower, speak softly and carry a big stick, instituted by Theodore Roosevelt during his presidency. Basically, Roosevelt, by creating the Panama Canal, by everything else that he did, basically made it clear that the United States was going to have a say in world affairs, and you couldn't ignore the U.S. I mean, John, I'm not saying it's not impossible. I'm just saying where is the proof of that, the physical proof. Under what president did government cheese come out? What do you mean by government cheese? That sounds like a rationing thing that would have been from the last World War. FDR also banned sliced bread for a short time. Let me see. Yeah, that sounds like FDR. I don't know what your question is. For the sake of nice and holy, please answer. I would be happy to answer any question you got about history or social studies, but I don't even know what you're asking. I wonder how future generations will think about Trump and his presidency. Trump is an Andrew Jackson-like figure. Maybe he's a wannabe. Maybe he is just like Andrew Jackson. It'll be impossible for future generations to ignore him. Now, the historical profession is generally left-leaning, especially in academia. So there's going to be a lot of derision about Donald Trump. And perhaps some of that is earned. I'm not going to really share my political perspectives on any of it, but I will say that Trump has definitely made a name for himself in two ways. One, by doing things that presidents have not done in a long time. His boldness is quite impressive, whether you like it or not, but also by being extraordinarily bombastic and over the top. And that is something that he's generally hated for. What do you think of technocrats like Zuckerberg, Bezos, and their influence on national global affairs? The rich and the powerful are more interconnected, more wealthy, and more in control than ever before. But whenever people have been rich and powerful in any society, now they're more interconnected globally. They have tried to build bulwarks that will protect them and their generations afterwards from outside investigation or anything that could take them down. The ancient Egyptian pharaohs did this. The priestly class of the Mesopotamians did this. It is not uncommon for people in different societies in different parts of the world who have power and wealth to try to protect themselves. Trump, let me see. About if Bukharin did being reactionary, being relevant to what Stalin did. You mean Bukharin? Yeah, Bukharin was basically... It was Trotsky who was the radical, Bukharin was the moderate, and Stalin was between the two of them, and Stalin played them both off of each other and then played them both against himself. Basically, Stalin was not stupid. A lot of people, especially communist apologists and socialists today, will think of Stalin as an unintellectual brute who was just mad with power. But I don't think that's actually historically accurate. Stalin was very crafty, very politically motivated, and also, I think he's just like Napoleon in Orwell's Animal Farm. And I think Orwell figured it out, being a socialist himself, how some socialists are very much able to brutalize people, even if it means betraying their ideals. But Stalin was always able to re-identify the revolution as wherever he was. Wherever he was, that is where Marx and Lenin would be. Wherever he was, that was where the Communist Party ought to be. And if you weren't, you were a problem. So Trotsky certainly wasn't there, so he was a problem. And Bukharin certainly wasn't there, so he was a problem. And it didn't matter that the old guard during the purges, like Lev Kamenev and other figures, were just done away, or Zhukov were done, not Zhukov, I'm trying to remember the other name. They were done away with by Stalin because they were no longer where the pulse of the revolution and the party was. Stalin always made sure that the pulse of the revolution, the pulse of the Communist Party in Russia, was his own. And he did this through manipulating the general secretary position to register everybody as loyal to him, and he also did this by basically reforming the Soviet Union. But Stalin, make no mistake about it, Stalin believed himself an intellectual and believed himself a communist. He wasn't just an opportunist, neither was Lenin. Why did the Ottomans fail to conquer Italy? The Habsburgs, the Polish intervene and stop them from taking, King Jan Sobieski stops them from taking over Vienna in 1586. There's various different reasons the Ottomans failed to take over Italy despite being very close to it. The Knights Hospitaller overthrowing the forces at Malta is one of the biggest upsets, the Battle of Lepanto. Basically, the Holy League, the efforts of the Habsburgs were the key factors that kept the Pope from falling under the domination of the Ottoman Empire. Did George Washington travel around the world and where? I don't know if he traveled much outside of the United States. Washington really was a homebody. What was it for the sake of power, for the sake of political position? I think for Stalin, those two are one and the same. Talk about the Black Hand. Mano Nera, Black Hand, is in reference to the mafia. Um, you have large numbers of American immigrants to the U.S. or Italian and Southern European immigrants to the U.S. in the late 19th century. Like the Irish and Germans before them, and like the Chinese and the Mexicans after them, every one of these groups, if they failed to achieve the American dream through licit means, would often find ways, some parts of them, would find ways to achieve it through illicit means. The mafia is probably the most notorious example, the cartels would be a modern day example, of people seeking to gain the wealth and glory that they were promised by coming to the United States through illicit means. What made the mafia interesting was that the United States government kept a blind eye to it for various reasons. What would the U.S. today be like today if Kennedy was not shot? Would he have done great things and would his brother become president? Yes, I think if Kennedy is not killed, then you don't have the political violence and activism of the 60s being at the same level. I think you have a much more peaceful trend in the civil rights movement. I think Kennedy enacts legislation that probably keeps the more radical factions of the African American community from forming more violent civil rights groups that would be like the Black Panthers, for instance. I don't know that you have King and Kennedy's brother killed. You could easily have 16 years of Kennedy presidency at that point. I don't think Kennedy gets heavily involved in Vietnam, and I don't think the political fracas of the late 60s happens. Basically, I think he's one of the best presidents, and I think he's one of the best presidents during that time. It is Q&A time. It's been Q&A time the entire time, Under Table, but it's good to see you. Let me see. Have you been on any president's plane? Not specifically. At what point did the Ottomans go from global power to very unstable? The 18th century, the Ottomans kind of stagnate, and in the 19th century, the Russians just keep punching them. Catherine the Great seizing the Crimea and gaining the dominance over the Black Sea, and later wars, the Crimean War being an exception, not the rule. The Russians basically turned the Ottomans into the punching bag of the 19th century, while the British carve up North African territories from them. Egypt gains its independence under Muhammad Ali. Yes, that's where that name actually comes from. The Ottomans were a shell of their former selves, limping into the 20th century. Why were the Polish the strongest country in the early 1600s, ignoring China? Well, the strongest country in Eastern Europe, maybe even in Europe in general, is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. You have a combination of two societies. They were dominant. They almost conquered Russia. They fight constantly with the Swedish for dominance over the Baltic and northeastern European corner. And they are also extraordinarily Catholic, extraordinarily loyal. They are not hampered by international wars, like the 30 Years' War does not affect the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth the way it does the French and the Habsburgs. And by that I mean the Holy Roman Empire in Austria, which is Holy Roman Empire is basically just Germany, and some other places. But the Polish are extraordinarily powerful during the 17th century, and then like every other empire or powerful kingdom, they fall. The rise of Brandenburg Prussia, which splits off large sections of Polish land, and of course the rise of the Russians under Peter the Great and later Catherine the Great and Elizabeth Petrovna will lead Poland to being divided over and over again, where Poland basically doesn't exist into the 20th century. So the Spanish and Italians, Polish, Maltese, united to fight the Ottomans. Yeah, it's called the Holy League. And the Habsburgs had access to Spain, so they were able to use a lot of the resources and power from the Spanish in order to fight against the Ottomans. And eventually they just decide to stop killing each other, and the Habsburgs start fighting the French during the 30 Years' War, for instance. Think the Chinese thing is from when the government decided to buy a bunch of dairy to help industry and didn't know what to do with it, so they made it into cheese and stored it for years, then gave away. Oh. I've heard of that before. It sounds like the resourcefulness in industry that we're used to seeing from Chinese civil bureaucracies. What is your favorite thing about the Renaissance? I love the vernacular language movement. On the one end, you have scholars going ad fontes, studying original sources and wanting to learn Greek and Hebrew so that they can learn Scripture. But you also have the demand for written works in the vernacular, and Dante Alighieri and Petrarch start this movement, but then of course you later have writers like Erasmus and even Shakespeare are contributors to this factor of creating not just creating a language, written works of antiquity in their own language. And once they do that, they decide to, instead of just translating, copying, they're going to create their own works and their own motifs and their own themes and their own ideas into their own language. And that's why you have Shakespeare, and that's why you have the writings of the 17th century in England and France, Molière and Spencer and folks like that. But the real truth is you have a desire to learn ancient languages and ancient things, but you also have a desire for modern languages to be used. So, of course, you get the various translations of the Bible. The biggest product of this is, of course, the King James Bible. Those are all huge parts of the Renaissance that people don't talk about enough. Renaissance the art is amazing. I love the art. The art's my personal favorite, but if there's something we don't talk about with the Renaissance that we need to, it's the oxymoronic desire to study original languages while producing them in your own language yourself. The rise of English, French, German, things like that. The Black Hand from Serbia. The Black Hand was a nationalist movement in Serbia that wanted Bosnia to gain its independence. And of course, one of their members was Gavrilo Princip, and that's the guy that kills Franz Ferdinand, which sets off a series of events that leads to the Great War. What if the Ottomans took over Austria? How the world would look today? I think the Habsburgs collapse. France maybe gets involved. I think there would be a concerted effort to push the Habsburgs out, but Europe would not have developed the way it did. I don't think you have the creation of the German state. Would have been very interesting. Let me see. Who was the U.S. president during the time of Simón Bolívar, and was there any public relations or negotiations? James Monroe, who generally encouraged Latin American independence movements, and of course wrote the Monroe Doctrine to keep the Europeans and their hands off of recolonizing Latin America. What if Germany, Poland, Austria became one country? Do you think they could compete with America? No. Could you tell us about the Black Death in Europe, how it started and ended? Fleas on rats, and arriving in shipping centers like major port cities. Venice is a huge trading center during the 14th century, and you have the deaths of about 50 million people. A third to a half of Europe's population die, and then it spreads out and goes towards Russia and China. Between 1347 and 1351, it's the largest global pandemic recorded in history, and it's just, I could do an entire live stream lecture, which I probably should, about the Black Death and what it did to European society. I think the Swedish Empire was kind of overhyped. It lost to an extremely weak Poland. Lithuania was stomped by Russia. People say it was number 1. It was number 8. Well, if you consider what it did during the 30 Years' War, the Gustavus Adolphus, that Sweden was the most powerful Protestant country in Europe in the late 16th and early 17th century, other than England, is pretty impressive. And the Swedish for the 1600s were the premier power in the Baltic. We're just so used to Russia having control because of its large amount of land and resources and manpower, but the Swedish were there for a long time. Let me see. With all you said about the Renaissance, would you agree that we're at the dawn of a Renaissance right now with artificial intelligence? Could be. The church condemning cats can't help much with plague situation. Yeah. The church did some crazy things back then. This is also the time of Inquisition and persecution of heretics, so. I've answered both about the Black Hand. I've talked about both the Mafia and the Serbian nationalists, so you can go back and listen if you didn't hear that. Can you cover the history of slavery in different areas? Well, that's a live stream lecture in and of itself, but not all slavery is chattel slavery. Some slavery is closer to indentured servitude, paying off credit card debt, or things like that by doing work. Chattel slavery is basically a form of slavery that did exist before the Europeans, but in transporting people intercontinentally to different areas of the world in order to work on farms and plantations, it becomes extraordinarily impractical to end slaves' terms when the slaves are not from Europe, when they're from a completely different area. So a lot of African American slaves actually started off as indentured servants, and then it eventually just became commonplace to keep them in servitude for the rest of their lives. Chattel slavery existed before then, but slaves could sometimes rise to high-ranking positions. The Janissaries were slaves, or people who agreed to go into slavery. The Romans, slaves, some of them became high-ranking people who owned land and became citizens eventually. Buying your freedom was always a part of slavery in almost every single part of the world. The church was pure evil? I wouldn't say it was pure evil. It was retrograde, but that's because it was 700 years ago. Was the invention of cheese an accident? You could say that. Do you think Napoleon created the most powerful empire in the world? No. The British Empire was far more powerful than Napoleon. Napoleon conquered a huge swath of land more quickly and efficiently than anyone else had since Alexander, and that's what makes Napoleon so impressive. You can go watch my video on Napoleon. He's my favorite historical figure, and I talk about him a lot on the channel. What president do you support? What? I don't share my political views. Yep, Benin, Sierra Leone, Nigeria. Yep. All right. If time is just a dimension, are we already dead somewhere? Possibly, I don't know. What I do know is that Abraham Lincoln is dead, and I'm sad about that. Britain conquered about 20%. About 25% of the world's population was British at the height of its power and control. What do you think would have happened if Napoleon didn't lose the last coalition? I don't know if he wins at Waterloo, I don't know how far he gets, but if he doesn't lose to the Russians, I think that Napoleon dominates Europe, and I think the French are the most powerful force in Europe for the rest of the 19th century. Napoleon was about 5'5" or 5'4". Wasn't necessarily short, especially by standards back then, but political propaganda and cartoons, which were on the rise in the 19th century, but the British depicted him as a really short man to kind of offset his huge accomplishments. The door of no return in Benin today. Yep. Chinese was an accident. Beer was an accident. Friction fire was an accident. Accidents are great. Yep. If I'm correct, gunpowder was an accident. Beer was, and the Egyptians invented beer. Napoleon and Hitler's biggest fault was invading Russia. Actually, I think that both of them, especially Napoleon, can be justified in his invasion of Russia. I think it makes sense to invade Russia. Breaking with the continental system to side with the British was a mistake. And Napoleon got really close. If the Russians hadn't been willing to burn their own capital, Napoleon would have never relented. Let me see here. So anyways, I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're relaxing, enjoying your President's Day with me here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And drop more questions, comments, and topics in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. We have another 20 minutes or so. We're going live now. We were going to go live at 6, but we decided to go live earlier so that people all over the world could join us, and we really appreciate that. And we've got some great friendly historians like Shuriken, Wild and Fresh, who's a moderator. Wild, do you know how to put links in the chat? If you do, you can help me out here. Do you think Germany was a superpower after World War I? I think the First World War is the 7 Years' War. I've talked about this a lot on the channel, but if you mean the Great War, no. They were decimated and destroyed and made to pay inordinate amounts of war debt. How did Napoleon manage to raise an army in 1815 after being exiled? By risking his own life and telling the French, you can kill me if you want, and then they just basically all abandoned their posts and side with him, overthrow Louis XVII, and put him back in power. Russian in winter is insane, plus maintaining those supply lines to Moscow is a great that would test the U.S. military today. Yes, it would, and the Russians are very well aware of this and proud of it, and that's why you can fight defensive wars and beat the Russians all the time, but an invading war, an offensive war against the Russians is really, really bad. And that legacy of what history's legacy always impacts our minds. And that legacy of what happened with Napoleon and what happened to Hitler still lives rent-free in the minds of the U.S. military today, which is why Russia has not been invaded. Thoughts on Israel and what kind of future you foresee for Palestinian statehood. So people talk about that all the time. I mean, people want to know about this all the time. You're a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's great to see you. I don't want to get into it because it's too controversial. People have discussed it a lot on this channel and want to always hear my opinion, and they get mad when I share what I think is a reasonable, rational opinion. Give a super chat, and I'll discuss it. Oh, Faraz is here. Good to have him here. Let me see here. Is it true that Napoleon was inspired by Hannibal? Yes. What fuel came first, especially for war? Gasoline or diesel? Gasoline. Even Trump's scared of Putin. I don't think anyone should be scared of Putin. I think Putin is a paper tiger. I think invading Russia is fearful. No, it's you don't have to apologize. If you want to give a donation to the channel, I'm more than willing to talk about it. There's a lot of great history to it. Thank you, Samuel. I really appreciate that. I have plenty of thoughts about Israel and Palestine and that whole issue, but I look at it from a historical perspective, and I look at the whole question of the genocide there as a historical perspective, and that's why people really lose their minds. So you think Russia is less of a threat than the common person thinks? Yes. I think it's a bogeyman. I think the Soviet Union was a existential threat to the world, and I think the fact that the Russians have nukes is problematic. One of the people were asking about, I was talking about the good things Bill Clinton did. One of the failures was probably the first strike thing, because that refusing to respond to a first strike emboldens, I think, people like Russia, people like Putin and the Russians. Hello, Drew. Thank you for joining us. Which I was gone, but I will ask again. Why historically national and socialism have been in conflict? Oh, I gave like a 5-minute answer to that. They're not, according to Marxist traditional doctrine, they are not. But that doesn't stop socialists from using nationalist imagery, patriotism, and things like that in order to gain power. Look at Pinochet, look at Franco, look at Mussolini, and look at Hitler. Well, you want to know my opinion about genocide? Sure. Do you think that Germany is preparing for a war with Russia? Yes. Yeah, I just gave a 5-minute answer. It was extremely detailed. It had a really good explanation about Marxist doctrine. I don't want to repeat it. I can't repeat it. Yeah, you've got Instagram. You can follow us there. Patreon has my First Lady series. If you subscribe there, I haven't finished it, but I'm close. There's also my Facebook. There we have TikTok, where you guys can get bonus content you won't get here. And there's there's Substack, where you can read my articles. If you don't like the sound of my voice, maybe you like the thoughts that I share, there's an option too. There's a genocide against white people that makes me sad. Oh, jeez, not this again. Democrat Party is run by a bunch of race card throwing pieces of trash. Oh yeah, because the Republicans don't have any problems. I just love it when people come onto the channel and I can read their people have been on this channel for years almost. We're at 2 years now officially. I probably should tell the story about how the channel got started, because we got started on President's Day, or around President's Day. So this is our birthday. But people have not been able to figure out my politics, and they've been here for at least a year. I'm able to figure out someone's politics in one comment. It's ridiculous. Do you have any takes that doesn't align with the scholarly mainstream historians' take? Yes, I believe in 3 world wars instead of 2. I think it's time Europe started taking care of Europe. Saying that makes me feel how America felt entering World War II. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, because how does that happen? Europe is so used to America, and America pushed its own will on making Europe dependent on itself in order to be a bulwark against communism in the Cold War. So how does that happen now? How do we get rid of that when the post-Cold War consensus has kind of fallen apart, and the neo-isolationism is on the rise in Europe and in the United States? How do you is this an answer to we needed NATO because of the Cold War, but there's no Cold War anymore, so do we really need NATO anymore? Yeah. What was the first original language in Europe? I don't know. Indo-Aryan languages were common there thousands of years ago. So it's the same family as Hindi, for instance. If you can tell someone's politics by one comment, then what do you think my politics is, since I had so many comments? Well, I don't know what you are. America will defend Europe and Israel if they get attacked by Russia or Iran. Well, that's because those are satellites. The United States, after the last World War, did what it could to turn those areas into satellites. What's the Third World War? It's not what the Third World War is, it's what the First World War is. The First World War is the 7 Years' War of the 1750s and 60s. The Second World War is the Great War, and the Third World War is the war with the Nazis. How and when the Roman Empire took over Greece? In the middle of the 2nd century until about the end of the 2nd century BC, the Romans launched several military campaigns that conquered all of Greece and Asia Minor, destroying the remnants of the Greek kingdoms there. The Greeks were not united by any stretch of the imagination. The Hellenistic empires had basically collapsed. The last traces and vestiges of them were destroyed when the Ptolemies were destroyed, when Cleopatra was killed by Augustus. So the Romans really took over a Hellenized world and were Hellenized themselves, but had no desire to let the Greeks have their autonomy. In fact, the Greeks had been in Italy for quite some time, and the Romans pushed them out over time, just like they did with the barbarians and the Carthaginians, and then took the fight to them. This is something the Romans did all the time against the Gauls and the Celts, against the Carthaginians, and against the Greeks themselves. Look up Pyrrhus of Epirus and his fights against the Romans. Magna Graecia was a Roman province that was controlled, or an Italian province that was controlled by the Greeks. Your thoughts on Russian-Ukrainian war? Give me a super chat and I'll talk about it. How many dialects does Vietnam have? Don't know. The biggest threat for Rome was Carthage. Then the rest were easy job. Carthage was a huge threat. The Greeks were kind of a big threat. You have the Seleucid Empire, the remnants of that. The Parthians, I would say the Parthians and the Sassanids are the biggest threats because the Romans could never get rid of them. Does the legacy of Alexander the Great still exist in the Western world? Oh, absolutely. You don't have Greece being so influential philosophically, politically, artistically, and culturally, which means you don't have the Renaissance without Alexander the Great, which means you don't have the creation you don't have the Reformation, you don't have the split in Catholicism. I think a lot of these things are an indirect example of the Hellenistic world being so formidable in the last centuries BC, including its influence on the Roman Empire. I don't think you have Julius Caesar without Alexander the Great. I'm amazed by your ability to switch between topics, field questions, and still get out well thought out, coherent answers. Well, I really appreciate that. That's so kind of you, and I think that's a nice pinned comment for today's live stream. Is Alexander the Great originally from modern-day Greece? Macedonia, in the north, which was considered barbaric by the Greeks themselves, but actually was pretty formidable. And what they did was, his father started it, and he really solidified it, by uniting and forcing the Greeks to play nice with each other. They basically optimized the use of the phalanx, the elite weapon and warrior of the time, and just crushed the Persians. The Persians had been the scourge of Greek existence for a century and a half before then. All the Greeks needed to do was unify, and that was what they needed to obliterate the Persians. Why, as a picture, why do you have a picture of him? You should change your profile picture, Wendy. Was there a U.S. president that was never married? James Buchanan. Most likely a homosexual. And why some people seem to like, or at least be sympathetic or respectful, or maybe admirable towards Epstein. I don't want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Give a super chat if you want me to discuss that entire mess. One of his most historically worst scandals in U.S. presidential history that now has hurt 2 U.S. presidents. I don't think there's ever been a scandal in American political or just general history that has affected 2 presidents separately. Both Clinton and Trump and their legacies are being shaped by this man. His deep connections to different intelligence agencies, his fingers in so many different pies. The man's influence is not, I don't want to use a good word, it's horrifying. It's awful in the sense that it does fill you with awe how much this man actually impacted world affairs, and to think there are probably other people who are just like him who just haven't been caught. Yeah. Wendy, change your profile picture. It is historically relevant. It is really interesting. But again, give me a super chat if you want me to go into more depth about it. If you want me to go in depth on any particular topic beyond what I just talked about, consider a super chat. I'm not going to try to beg for money, but there are things that people bring up, and I'm tired of talking about them because I've talked about them ad nauseum, and I want to focus on history. Socialism based on race is not socialist, from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs, not race-based whatsoever. The National Socialist Party was anything but that. Well, the National Socialists in Germany were definitely had a racial element to them. They were nationalists as well as socialists. So on the nationalist front, that's where the racism really comes from. Not that all nationalists or nationalist movements are racist, but all nationalists do have a tendency to say our nation, our society is better than other people's society, and that can be a temptation to racism or an excuse for racism in the case of the Nazis. But they were very socialist in many other ways. Socialism is not necessarily inherently multicultural, as people might think. It believes in the destruction and suppression of all cultures if those cultures challenge the state. Cultural apparatuses such as religion are seen as challenges to the socialist and communist revolution. And Marx himself was extraordinarily racist. So was Engels. All the early communists, were very racist. And of course, they are also victims of their time with particular views, but social Darwinism was impactful in socialist movements, where you basically see people from non-Western countries as inferior technologically and civically, therefore their races are inferior. Persians and the Greeks had a big war, and that was the first time the Iran fought the Western world. It happened they had many big wars. Did Sam Adams brew beer? No, it's just a legacy, a nod towards him. And Sam Adams beer is delicious, so fair enough. Israel's to blame for all the world problems. All. Yes, that's not true, but okay. A tiny little nation the size of New Jersey causing that many problems is pretty impressive if that's the case, but it's not, so whatever. Historically speaking, have there been any other such cases like Epstein? Basically, blackmail rich, influential people with sex-based leverage. Rasputin would be a close example, but Rasputin didn't have an organized career that just seems to have been basically made to influence and control different people. Marx was racist and sexist even standards of his time. Yep. Sorry, the National Socialist here, I want to laugh. No, he would have already said something about nationalist socialism if he had. He is a British nationalist who also happens to be a socialist, so we kid that one of my moderators is a national socialist, but he is not. Do you think the Umayyad conquered North Africa easily, or the Byzantine in North Africa fight back? Well, you have the war between the Sassanids and the Byzantines that kind of devastated both empires, and it made them a lot easier to conquer by the Umayyads and the Rashidun Caliphate. So yeah, but there was resistance. There was always resistance. Islam is 80% of the world's problems. I wouldn't go that far. I think radical Islam is a huge it may be responsible for 80% of the problems in the Middle East. The United States is responsible for many of the problems too. What was Rasputin's background? He was a peasant from Siberia, but he was a religious monk who joined some sort of freaky sect that basically taught hedonism as a way to receive God's grace, which is how Rasputin justified his drunken orgies while also calling himself a holy man and a devout follower of God. And a healer. Do you think Islam was forced in North Africa? Some people accepted it willingly and some people were forced. When you conquer an area and spread your religion to it, it's hard not to argue that it was forced. Blaming groups of people for the world's problems is the problem. Very, very well said. Did you know that there's a museum that has the private parts of Rasputin? Yes. The Bolsheviks, I think, castrated him. Okay, sorry, Zionists. I should say who just happened to reside in Israel. Zionists just so happen to be the richest in the world and have our politicians blackmailed. Look up AIPAC tracker. You're not going to like this, but somebody, because I talk about this issue so much, did an AIPAC tracker for me, and the results were 0. So, Shamo, yeah, I'm very well aware of all of this stuff. Thank you for showing up to a channel just to bring a bunch of nonsense about a topic that isn't pertinent to what I'm discussing because this is an obsession for you. You will never find more people who are obsessed with Israel, even than the Jews, than the anti-Semites, or the anti-Zionists, whatever they want to call themselves. Is it true that Rasputin smelled like a goat? Could be. Didn't bathe often. Did Biden really get in a car accident and his first wife died, supposedly drunk? I think that's what happened. That's also what happened at Chippequatic with Ted Kennedy. Was there open trade between the Ottoman Empire and Europe? The Venetians actually, despite hating and fighting against the Ottomans, traded openly with them after they took over Constantinople. Iranian pre-modern history has 2 parts, pre-Islamic and post-Islamic. And interestingly, because of that, in its modern history, it has 2 far rights rather than 1. Interesting. So, yeah. Anyways, other questions about history or social studies. We're just over an hour. We're going to wrap it up soon. Rasputin's rationale was that we should make the most of Christ's sin-absolving sacrifice by sinning prolifically. Pretty weird stuff. He's a weird guy. Definitely one of the weirdest guys in history, but an interesting one. I have several videos on Rasputin. I have an entire series on Russian history, and I have an entire series on the Russian Tsars. So please go check out all the short and long-form content that we have. I am a Russian historian by trade, more than any other history. That's the one I've studied, so please check that out. But anyways, that's not me signing off. I will sign off soon. I'm going to answer a few more questions, then I'm going to tell you, then we're going to do a little story time with the rain in the background, and I'm going to tell you how the channel came to be. And I'm glad you like the show, Ralph. It's great to have you here. I heard rumors that the Umayyad, if you don't convert to Islam, then they sell you as a slavery. Some of them did. That in your background. It looks like you are wearing it. It looks good on you. Thank you. It's the Uncle Sam hat, and this is a President's Day banner. How vast was Alexander the Great's empire throughout its conquest? Pretty vast. I mean, you have all of Greece, all of Turkey, Palestine and Israel, Egypt, and large sections of Persia. The Romans never got into Persia, but they did basically absorb all of Alexander's empire. Was Biden's current wife really the family babysitter at the age of 15? No. That's Jill Biden. Jill Biden, I think that would have to be... Yeah, I don't think so. No. What Islamic empire is your favorite? Probably the Safavids. The gunpowder empires are really impressive to me. And what city in Islamic civilization you like more? Baghdad. That's where the Abbasids, that's where the Islamic Golden Age really comes through. Baghdad was huge for the Islamic Caliphate and for the Golden Age of Islam in the 9th and 10th centuries. How did Christianity survive in North Africa after the conquest? Muslims do not automatically just kill Christians. That's radical Muslims, but Muslim kingdoms and empires were willing to allow some sort of religious toleration. They look at Christians and Jews as people of the book, sharing a common religious and cultural ancestry in some ways with Abraham, and of course with Jesus being a prophet and Moses being a prophet. Judaism and Christianity are similar to Islam. The Quran calls the Bible the Word of God. So there was a level of toleration, but there was but if you were forced to serve in the military unless you paid the jizya, which is a tax. If you didn't pay the jizya, then you were subject to some sort of being forced to serve in the military. You might be sold into slavery. Persecution, discrimination were common, but not heavy mass murdering of Christians and Jews. And how can you answer questions so fast and don't have to think about it? I don't know. Are you familiar with the channel Oversimplified? Yes, I do like their stuff. They're pretty good. Religion is cancer. Religion should be banned. It's ignorant and dangerous. Yeah, I've heard this I've heard this perspective from you before, Armando. Is it I don't think so. I think religion is a vehicle people use to get whatever they want, and that can be peace and justice and love. Look at Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and that can be evil and power and control. Look at the jihads and the crusades. Is there radical Christianity? Yeah, the Ku Klux Klan would be a great example of radical Christianity. Hinduism is quite fascinating. The oldest religion in the world. I have an entire video on it. Thank you, a walking encyclopedia. I really appreciate that. That's so kind of you. Yeah, history is what it is, but I like to talk about it in a friendly, neighborly manner, at least being friendly and respectful to anyone who wants to be friendly and respectful about it. So thank you, Ralph. Thank you for liking and subscribing, Mr. Meaty. We are headed towards 20,000 subscribers, and you are a help for that. Do you like Norse paganism? Thor and Odin? Yeah, absolutely. We live stream on Friday, all the time. I wouldn't call Buddhism a religion. I wouldn't even say that Buddhism is necessarily tolerating. Buddhism is tolerating of circumstances outside of their control, which they believe is almost everything, so it makes sense that there's a lot of tolerance in Buddhism. Why couldn't Napoleon defeat Russia? The Russian winter, the Russians were willing to burn their own capital. In many ways, winning at Borodino and surrounding Alexander I, Napoleon did defeat the Russians. He just couldn't vanquish them. How come some modern-day countries fended off foreign invaders? Russia, China, Japan, but others couldn't. India did many times. Using the Himalayas as a backdrop for the Indian subcontinent creates a natural barrier that makes it very, very easy to defend. The British and the French and the Dutch, however, the Portuguese were actually the first landing and by boat, bringing trade, but also bringing weapons of war. That was much harder. The breakdown of centralized power and authority in India with the collapse of the Mughal dynasty and the rise of the Maharashtra Confederacy basically pitted various different Rajas against each other, and the British and French were more than willing to use them until after the 7 Years' War, aka World War I, where the British, under Robert Clive and others, the British East India Company in particular, gained a stranglehold on a lot of Indian relations, and then slowly but surely colonized the entire subcontinent. Remember Biden's 9% inflation that brought about today's prices? Yeah, I remember. It's part of history. I was there. I lived through it. Why are you making this channel political? Has communism or socialism ever worked? Depends what you mean by socialism. Communism seems to kind of be batting zero. Do you think Norse paganism, I mean, it could work in the sense of if you're willing to just destroy large segments of your population, which the Bolsheviks certainly were willing to do. Do you think Norse paganism would be a good alternative to Christianity for America's dominant religion? I don't know. I mean, you have the look at the Vikings before and after Christianity. Before the Christianity, you have Viking raids, pillaging, a very violent society that was basically doing everything it could to survive. Christianity normalized relations between Northern Europe and Scandinavia and the rest of the continent. Is Taoism a religion or a creed? A creed. Do you know the civilizations the Aztecs could not conquer in Mexico? Who they could not conquer, like the Zapotecs, they turned into slaves. Is there anything you learned from history that has ever come handy in your personal life? I've impressed many women by talking about historical facts that they didn't know. How many years did it take to build the Great Wall of China? The Great Wall of China was built over several hundreds of years, but in different segments. So it would take a few years every time. The Han Dynasty, Qin Shi Huang, the founder of the Chinese empires, they would build the Great Wall of China, cut off a certain group of enemies, then they'd have another group of enemies, particularly the Mongols and the Huns, then they'd build another segment of the Great Wall. Can you talk about Emiliano Zapata? Mexican revolutionary leader, kind of worked with Pancho Villa during the Mexican Revolution in the 1910s, hostile to the United States, don't know much more about him. Yes, history shows mistakes, but also shows triumphs, and it's really just about how humans react and interact with each other over periods of time, and it shows that human nature is generally the same, but it is different in different contexts. Was Christianity highly influenced by Roman culture, especially Catholics? Yes, and Greek philosophy. Platonism is huge in the writings of Augustine and Aquinas, for instance. Was Nixon our first president to China? Yes, he was the first U.S. president to go to China. Let me see. My ancestors are Irish. Am I owed reparations for Ireland being enslaved for 7 centuries? I think the Irish have been oppressed more than any other group in history. The only difference between Irish, who were oppressed heavily in the United States, and African Americans is that African Americans were forced to come here. Irish indentured servitude was extremely common, and of course the Irish did not become chattel slaves. But yeah, the Irish have been heavily oppressed. I don't think anyone is owed reparations. Anyone. And I think that, and the only reason I think that isn't because of a political reason, it's because it's historically nonsensical. It's insanity. The person who gets the reparations immediately has to pay it back to another group if we're going to be strict about it. The only context that we are allowed to talk about reparations and promote it is in the fact of basically saying white people have to pay when white people themselves violated and mistreated each other for centuries, and it's very commonly known that the North African Barbary pirates violated white people all the time. You have Africans mistreating whites and enslaving them for the sake of Islam. Muslims did it. The Arab slave trade is how the slave trade in Africa really got started. That led to the intercontinental transatlantic slave trade. So really, reparations just doesn't really work. It doesn't make sense because it's an infinite regress where there's no end in sight, because every civilization and society has done something horrible to someone else. So you give reparations to the Sioux Indians. Are you going to give those? Are the Indians going to give those some of those reparations back to the Crow and the Pawnee, who they kicked out of the lands that they conquered? It's an endless loop. The English get reparations from the French for the Norman conquest, but then they have to give it to the Indians for stealing trillions of dollars from them. Michoacan were unconquerable. They had copper weapons. Interesting. I don't know about that. The Pura Chapa. Well, the Spanish conquered them. Is it true that extreme left always comes via revolution, but far right comes via election? Could be, but the March on Rome is definitely a coup d'etat. Coup d'etats are common. And you also have civil wars, how the Spanish came to power in Franco. The stream is going much smoother than usual without your mods around. Well, I mean, it's great to have them around. I don't know where they are. I don't know. I think they just suspected we'd start at 6, but I wanted to start earlier. So here we are. Thank you for spitting the truth and facts. I do my best, Eric. I'm not opposed to talking about white evils and white supremacy and the horrible things white people have done, the oppression that they have done. Certainly not. That needs to be discussed. But I'm not going to just ignore, and I'm not going to throw out whataboutism, but I'm just simply saying that there is no way that reparations ever make sense if you're going to apply it universally, because the history is so much more complex and so much more full than just white people bad, white people do bad things. Nor is it black people savages, black people do bad things. Nor is it Native Americans merciless savages, like the Declaration of Independence calls them. Also, it could bring back Americans to their true identity. Also, could bring Americans back to their true identity. What are you referring to? Norse paganism? No. America's true identity is generally Christian, historically. I'm not saying that's where it should be. I'm just saying what it is historically. Tanya, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Tanya has an emoji because she's a member. Members get their own live streams, their own extra bonus content, and early releases, so consider becoming a member. Palestinians have been suffering since 1948 by the hand of the state of Israel, Russia, Polish, and Russian. If Israelis were formed by the Russians, why was the Soviet Union diametrically opposed to the Israelis throughout much of their time? Why did they support the Arabs? Why did they support the Palestinians? If you want to talk about the history of it, it doesn't make any contextual sense that the Soviet Union, which was Russian, was opposed to the Israelis, when the Israelis are supposedly Russians. And this is the idea that the Ashkenazi Jews are not Jews at all, which is absolute nonsense, but I mean, that's just historically, culturally, and ethnically ignorant. Yeah, it's a smoking jacket. It turns me into History Hefner. Is it true that Vikings actually made it first to North America? Yes. Natives of the Americas have been suffering, and thank you for giving a gift membership. We really appreciate that. Fat Man, you are now a member. Tanya, we really appreciate everything you do for the channel, and the super chat's very, very helpful. Natives of the Americas have been suffering since 1492, since Christopher Columbus landed on native land. Yes, and guess what? They've been suffering a lot before then. The Carib tribe was known for committing cannibalism against the Taínos, and they tried to recruit Columbus to destroy the Caribs. So it's not as simple as you think. It's never as simple as you think. It's not as simple as white people good and natives bad, or natives good and white people bad. It's just the prevalent narrative today is that the natives were decent people that the Europeans ruined. That's not true. America was founded by white European, and the white European true identity of our ancestors is Norse paganism. Christianity is an alien religion that has been forced on white people. It maybe was in the 8th and 9th century, but not by the time it gets to America. It's warmly accepted by the people. So you can make that claim, but you're trying to retrofit something, retcon something that has nothing to do with actual European history. Yes, Norse paganism was part of European history, particularly in the Roman and early Middle Ages. But by the time you actually get to the Americas, to the United States, it's completely foreign and gone. Party ideology issues did separate the country between pro-slavery and anti-slavery. Yeah, but the division was cultural rather than politics. Is this politics upstream from culture or vice versa? Did Nixon negotiate anything on his visit to China? Opening relationships, trying to push them against the Soviets and towards the U.S., basically creating the groundwork for what would become U.S.-Chinese relations, the interdependent free trade that lasted until the Trump administration. Why did the Crusades take place? And what Iran is going through currently, they're related. I don't know how related they are, but the Crusades happened because of as a holy war to reconquer land that had been lost by the Christians, and because pilgrims were being attacked by the Muslims. I'm going to need to charge my phone, so I'm going to stay on and keep answering the questions. We're almost done. Just give me one quick second while I move over. I'll be right back. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, you think you have enough time and you think you have enough battery charge, but then the live stream goes 15 minutes longer than you wanted it to, and here we are. I'll wrap up soon. Why are most parts of Africa still poor? They don't have the manpower, the resources. Does it boil down to lack of institutions? There's that. There's post-colonial relations. There's decolonization. There's obviously the plunder of the Europeans and what they did. You have power struggles, political vacuums, the mixing of different ethnic and cultural tribes when the Europeans colonized those areas that led to huge conflicts, such as the Rwandan genocide is an example of that. Science rules. Everything humans should be science-based, not ruled by belief. Okay, science, that's true, but not everything but science can't prove everything. Did Nixon negotiate anything? I already answered that. I already answered about the Crusades. Why are we talking about Charlie Kirk's self-inflicted? Yeah, nobody's talking about that, Vinny. But you do have a nice Roman title. The year 3000, Vini Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. With that logic, please tell me, true Persian identity is Muslim or Zoroastrian? Well, I mean, part of the identity of Persia is indeed Islamic. You can't get away from that. It has been such a huge part of Islamic history or Iranian history and culture since before the Middle Ages. Do you think China is really a badass civilization? I mean, they're pretty impressive. Do you think Catholic, a 9,000-year-old Neolithic proto-city in central Turkey, was communist? I don't know enough about it. I would probably say no. Communitarians have existed as long as history has existed. Look at the Fabian Socialists. Look at Robert Moore. Look at the Utopia. Look at Thomas More's writings. Robert Owen, and Thomas More. But yeah, I don't know that they're communistic. Do you think the stories in the Bible are over embellished, like when Jesus walked on water, could have been walking on a sandbar? I mean, possibly. I don't know. The Bible, what I respond to is not necessarily supportive of the Bible, but what I do find interesting is that skeptics criticize the Bible. Historians criticize the Bible, don't look at it as a work of history, but do look at the works of histories by Thucydides, who has just as much embellishments, just as much miracles as the New Testament does. It's just common literary writing to have histories, biographies, which the Gospels are, full of stories of divine intervention for that time period. The Rig Vedas are no different. Do you ever think that, I already answered that. Has anarchist... Someone asked earlier, let me see here. Someone asked earlier, why didn't Christianity spread east instead of west into Europe and North Africa? Was Zoroastrianism too strong? There was spreading of Christianity, but I think that the Roman Empire, the Pax Romana, and the somewhat tolerant, believe it or not, the Romans were actually somewhat tolerant, despite the heavy persecution, made it a little easier for Christianity in that area. I also think that it mixed with Greek philosophy pretty well. You also had established Jewish communities in the West, more so than the eastern part of the world. Why you get so mad when the topic of genocide comes? I don't get mad. I'm tired of people thinking that everything is a genocide when very little of what actually is happening in the world today constitutes a genocide. Jews killed Jesus, they love the criminal. It's just, yes, if you're going to go on some sort of anti-Semitic rant because of that, understand that Jesus himself was a Jewish rabbi, so... Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. I've actually gotten through most of the chat. Can you think of two historical events that most people don't think are connected, but you believe that there is a connection? The French Revolution and the War of 1812. Without the French Revolution, you don't have the impressment of ships by the French and the British in a long-time war, which leads to the Americans getting tired of it and going to war with the British. Was Woodrow Wilson segregating the postal service a good move? No, I don't think segregation is good. What is the difference between cult and religion? Cults tend to be smaller, typically pretty cut off and exclusionary. Science has never been able to explain why the Earth is the perfect axis and rotation in space for life. Yep, it's the Goldilocks effect. Never been explained. The Big Bang, never been explained. These are scientific things that we believe to be true. These are scientific realities, but they are not necessarily explained by science. And I love science, but yeah. History can't explain everything, neither can science. Anyways, Bondi, the Attorney General, said if the Epstein list is released, the whole system will collapse. Your thoughts? It's quite possible. We've never had anything quite like this, but things like this have probably existed for quite some time, where powerful people control things behind the scene. It's just nowadays there's such an easy access to information that it's harder for them to keep secretive. I got to explain why not. Why not what? Why segregation is bad? Mistreating people because they are racially different is bad. Mormonism is more of a religion, but it did definitely start off very cultic, very violent to ex-members and anyone who opposed Mormonism. Utah's coming into the United States is a story in and of itself because of polygamy and God changing his mind. So, a lot to unpack there. Anyways, I'm going to wrap up, but before I wrap up, a reminder that we turned 2 years old today. This is indeed our birthday. The Friendly Neighborhood History Channel started in 2024. And started in February of 2024. I never thought it would be this, and so I'm very glad for that. But it basically, I'm not answering questions anymore. We turned, my birthday is not in February. You can guess what my birthday is. I don't share a lot about my personal life. My longtime subscribers like E-Dog and Rodolfo, my moderator, who don't know how old I am, don't know who I am, don't know my name, all of it. Happy birthday to your father. But the channel is 2 years old. Started the Sunday of President's Day in February of 2024. My girlfriend, about a month before that, we were driving somewhere, and I told her, I could name every single U.S. president in under a minute. And I said, "Do you want me to?" And then I can name every single monarch in English history. And she says, and I say, "You want to hear it?" And she's like, "No, I want you to put it on TikTok. You should put it on TikTok and make a lot of money." And I was incensed. I thought that was really offensive because here I just wanted to share that knowledge and information with her, and she made it about being popular. But the idea kind of lingered in my head. What if I could actually use my knowledge and my memory to actually spread a bunch of information about history or social studies? I don't think I'm muted. I think you guys can hear me. I don't know why Pure Water can't hear me. So why don't I use my information to spread knowledge into a world full of ignorance? I don't think there's anything great or moral about what I'm doing. I don't think I'm superior because of what I'm doing. But I do think that people don't know history, and I think that's a tragedy. I think history is fascinating. History, for those of you still celebrating Valentine's Day, is lovely. That's why I always sign off by saying, love history. What is the solution to the ignorance of our civilization? Maybe it's learning more about the past. But I didn't think of any moral or ethical reason to start a channel. I mean, I also knew that if the channel got good enough, I could actually make some money on it, but I didn't know how that worked. I didn't know anything. But I decided to just share some knowledge, and I didn't think it would get anywhere. I know how hard it is to make YouTube videos and actually get any attention. I knew that at least. Shorts, I didn't know how they worked and how you could get a lot of attention really quickly. So Sunday, about 4 o'clock, President's Day weekend, like the 18th or the 19th, I guess, is the actual birthday, February. I'm taking the dogs out for a walk. Her dogs, not mine. And for those of you who wonder about my sexuality, that should probably give you a big hint, but I don't say much more than that. I was driving. So this is maybe a month later, and I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I'll just go onto YouTube and see about making one of these short videos. And you can go back and watch it. But I basically said I was out with the dogs. I was shaking uncontrollably because I shake a lot. I have a tremor. But for those of you who wonder, but I have one hand free, and then the other hand I'm pulling the dog. So even if I didn't have a tremor, I'd still be shaking. And I wasn't nervous. I just decided to talk about something I knew. So I just tried to sound casual. And I talked about the Roman Empire and why it fell. And then I talked about the lost cause myth, the idea that the Civil War was really just the South trying to hold off Northern aggression, which is nonsense. I had that walk, and I had those videos, and I'm like, well, this won't go anywhere, but I guess I've done it, so we'll see. I told her about it, and the next morning I wake up, and I go on to YouTube, and I look at it, and 300 people had watched the video about the lost cause. I think it's like 450 something now. Now, since then, I've had videos that have had hundreds of thousands of views, so it was nothing. I didn't know that was nothing, though, at the time. I thought, well, that's amazing. 300 people actually listened to me talk about something. I've never reached an audience that big before in any form of my life. So it was like, I'm shaking her next to me, waking her up, and yelling at her and telling her, hey, look, there are hundreds of people actually watched my channel and watched what I said. And there have been times where and I got to give her credit. She was the one who created the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. There would be no Friendly Neighborhood History channel without her. So I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have thought of it. I'm not that practical. And so it was just like, wow, I've got to start doing this. And then it turned into, well, I've got to start doing series, and I got to start doing long-form videos, and I've got to start doing, live streams eventually to get more attention. The first live stream I did was in May, and it was a Q&A, and it was in a different place. It wasn't in my studio. I didn't have microphones. I didn't have anything. I didn't understand the lighting. I didn't understand a lot of the stuff, but now I basically do for the most part. It was an amazing thing to do, to see that people could actually watch my videos and pay attention. And then I made, about a month into the time, I made a video about Henry VIII and his wives, and 10,000 people watched it, which is still pretty small. But I was like, wow, this could actually be something, like, I could actually make something with this. There's a hunger to learn about truth and to learn about history and social studies. So that was something that I found out that was just amazing. And so it went from there, and now the channel is something that I never thought it would be. I hope my goal last year was to get monetized. We got monetized. My goal this year is to make this my full-time thing. I don't make enough money to live off of this, but if I could make this my full-time thing, I probably could. So you can help that by liking and subscribing, giving a super chat, becoming a member, all of that, but you don't have to. There's no pressure. I know I bring it up a lot, but there's really no pressure to do that. I'm just trying to make you aware of everything we have available on the channel. So we're into our third year now. Where will we be in February of 2027? I have no idea. But I never thought we would get this far. I never thought we would get to 10,000. I never thought we could get to 1,000 subscribers. We're now over 11,000. The goal is 20,000 by the end of the year. So yeah. And the Hugh Hefner get up. This was actually a gift from her. She gave me this. Same girlfriend I'm talking about. She gave me this smoking jacket as a holiday gift, but also a gift for the channel. And I decided that I'd start wearing it on every one of my broadcasts because it was a smoking jacket. And everybody knows about Hugh Hefner. Everybody knows about dressing gowns. Ooh, it's a nice robe and all of this stuff. But a lot of people don't know about the history of it. And it's actually a historical item. As I've said many times, British officers coming back from the Crimean War were given Turkish tobacco for helping the Turks beat the Russians. And they didn't want to get on their street clothes and their business attire, so they would wear smoking jackets and smoke after dinner. And so it became the premier dressing gown, similar to like a Noel Coward type of thing or a Hugh Hefner sort of thing for wealthy officers in the 19th century, and then became a symbol for the rich. But for me, it turns me into History Hefner. It turns me into, there's different types of friendly history. There's regular friendly history where I'm just making videos. There's dark history, which is when somebody triggers me. And then there's History Hefner, which is just me, cool, calm as a cucumber, collected, talking about history with people who care about it. So, yeah. And thank you for the gift membership. And now Max is a member. members get early access. Yeah. So that's the story. I'm not going to share any more about my personal life, my girlfriend, or anything like that. But yeah, we are celebrating our birthday. What's the Hefner got to do with President's Day? Not much, although he was influential in American culture and politics. But touchdown, yeah, the history. I wear this almost for a lot of my live streams. This or a nice shirt and tie, something like that. Yeah, it's personal, but it's not that personal. Moderators like Harry, who've been with us for a while, don't know my birthday, don't know my age. People guess my age all the time. People don't know my job, what I do normally to make money. So yeah, this is just so typical of this channel, of YouTube, of the internet community. I mentioned Hugh Hefner, and somebody has to bring up he was a Jew who made corn so that he could corrupt people. That Hugh Hefner made corn so he could corrupt Christianity and the Christian West. Except that corn has existed for almost all of human history. Hugh Hefner's Jewishness had nothing to do with him wanting to corrupt Christians, and Hefner was secular anyways. Where's the origin of the word America? It's a derivative of Amerigo Vespucci, the explorer who proved that Columbus was wrong and had not gone to India. And yes, I say corn because the other word is highly offensive to the YouTube algorithm. So, I'm always teaching people on this channel. I'm teaching people all the time on this channel. Am I a teacher in real life? That remains to be seen. So. All right, early bird. Well, if I was wrong, please explain why I'm wrong. More than willing to be fact-checked. I've been fact-checked about a lot. I've learned a lot just doing this channel, just working with the wonderful people that you are. The knowledge I have gained about history and social studies, unbelievable. No, I'm not going to show you where I am in Land of the Feathered Serpent. So, anyways, 90 minutes, 30 more minutes than I was going to do. You know what? What the heck? Since it's the birthday of the channel and we all had a fun time, you got to learn more about me and you got to learn more about why I do this. I mean, I explain how I do this, and like where it started. Why do I do this? I do this because it's fulfilling. I do this because of how much I learn. I do this because I love seeing people learn new things. I do this because I think it's important. I'm not carrying any moral weight. There's no cause. Everybody has a cause these days. I hate that. I'm actually, in my personal life, like if you were to hang out with me, I'm actually very skeptical of people standing on the shoulders of giants and saying they're going to solve all the world's problems. I'm skeptical of people thinking they know better than people from the past. And maybe that's just because I've studied history, but I'm also skeptical. I'm also, laid back. I'm not like, okay, I have to go save the rainforest. I have to go save this today. I mean, I like saving rainforests. It's good, but I'm not using my channel as a form of activism. I'm not in it for politics. I'm not in it for money. I mean, if I could do it for money, that'd be fantastic. But yeah. So, what's the history of that fine attire you're wearing? Where did you get it? Well, I already answered that. This was a gift from the same girlfriend who helped me start the channel back as a holiday gift to do my live streams and all of that stuff. Can you explain how UK historically treated its black people compared to the US? Better than the US. Well, the UK hasn't had nearly as many Africans as the United States has. The United States is far more diverse. It's a much higher target of destination for immigration, willing immigration of Africans than the British are. Yeah. Yeah, but it is horrible. I mean, the British didn't have as major of a black population, but they had plenty of colonies that had black slaves. You also have the fact that they colonized Africa. I would say that they both have definitely, and of course the U.S. had slavery in the Civil War. But thank you for joining us. What on earth? Yep, I've talked about the jacket before. When are you going to wear an ascot? I have worn that before. I just didn't put it on today. Does anyone have any other questions, any last call stuff they want to do? Because I'm going to sign off. I'm tired. I've been doing this for an hour and 34 minutes. I want to enjoy my day off and the rest of my President's Day. If we get to 20,000 subscribers, by the way, and you want to know more about my personal life, when we get there, I think we will, especially if we get there this year. Then I'll do a live stream where I'll spill all. You can learn my name. You can learn where I'm from. You can learn my religion, politics, all the stuff that you always are curious about. And then I go back to basically being anonymous. Like I'm going to go back to talking about history as objectively as I can. What's the shortest war in history? I think there was a war that lasted for only a couple of hours. Are the British more racist? Britain is a more classist society than the United States, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily more racist. And the United States has plenty of examples of racism. The issue is proportionality. The British have not had as much proportional experience with different races, as the U.S. has had. Did Africa steal Rhodesia from the Boers? No, the British stole Rhodesia. That's why it's named after a Brit from the Dutch. I'll have to learn about Catholic. But since the Brits were the people who fought Americans to have slaves, you think the British is to blame for the African American problems? No. 38 minutes? Oh, yeah. Anglo-Zanzibar War. Yeah, sounds about right. The English defeating a much larger African force with much better technology. In your opinion, what culture was very impactful on the world but not very well known? Definitely Indian civilization. I don't think we know enough about it. I think we know about Greece and Egypt and Rome, but we don't know about ancient India and how impactful it was in creating kind of the idea of trade and attraction towards the East that continued to linger in the European mind for centuries. Anyways. All right, then. Well, I'm going to get going. I'm going to sign off. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And you can learn more of the information that Manfam was talking about when he said we know a lot. And, I know a lot, and I have an ability to go between different topics, stuff we do on this channel all the time. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on Friday at 6 p.m. for our usual live stream Q&A. I might be on the road, though, for that one, so we'll see. And regular broadcasting continues. Check out the short and long-form videos, like my long-form video about Black History Month that comes out today at 8 p.m. Eastern. Have a great rest of your day. Like and subscribe on your way out. And as always, love history. Take care.